I'm Erica Lukes, host of UFO Classified. For me, life isn't simply black and white. Life is full of many unknowns. It is my goal to travel the world and to work with the world's leading experts in the hopes of making groundbreaking discoveries. Join me on UFO Classified Friday nights at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, only on KCOR.
Turn left and then down the river.
UFO Classified. UFO Classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Good afternoon, good evening, my friends. I'm Erica Lukes. I was happy to be here on a Friday, and I'm actually really happy I survived LAX late last night. That is always a treat. I've been to LA twice in a week, which I'm telling you, I feel like I've got a little bit of combat fatigue, but whatever. I have been a part of two shows that I have not been on before, and so that will be a lot of fun to see how those turn out. One of them should be airing pretty quickly, and I will keep you posted. The other one will be airing in a couple months. Again, I'm excited to be a part of all of this and to be able to get my face out there so I have the opportunity to reach more people and get good information to the public. You know, my thing and my passion is preserving history, giving people that matter a place to share their research, and also uncovering stories that are very mind-blowing. And you know, because I say this on every show now, the past few months I've been doing an expose on Skinwalker Ranch, on Bigelow, on everything that took place there, which was under the UFO banner, but really at the end of the day probably wasn't, unfortunately. And I also feel now, as I start doing more research into certain players in the field and the way things have gone historically, that unfortunately the UFO narrative is all too easily used by people who A, want to make money, B, spread disinformation, C, get these private contracts to build weapons technology. So these are truly disturbing things that we need to be on guard for. And tonight, my guest has been around the block. He understands exactly what the deal is. He has seen it decade after decade after decade. My friend is Barry Greenwood. He's not only my friend, but he is my mentor. He has taught me so much. I will never be able to thank him for everything he has done to teach me how to preserve history, to teach me how to look critically at a subject that is so fraught with landmines. It is incredible. He wrote a groundbreaking book called Clear Intent. If you don't have that, you need to get that book. Absolutely. You have to have that on your shelf. And that he co-authored that with Larry Fawcett, and that was about government secrecy with regard to the UFO topic. It is a killer book, and that was written in 1984 from my recollection. But Barry Greenwood is, in my opinion, I'm sure in many other people's opinion, the world's foremost archivist and historian on the UFO topic. And it's a lot of fun when my Skype is actually working. I get to sit there and have conversations with him and look at all of the things behind him, and I'm just in awe. And Barry has also been gracious enough to help me with my Utah UFO archive to make sure I'm preserving history, all of these wonderful things. And it really is, again, it's always a great honor here to have you, Barry, because you, like I said, you know more about the history of this subject than anyone.
Well, I don't know about anyone. There's a lot of people out there I know that have been around a long time, and they're very skilled in the subject. Some of them know more than me, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, I think, of course, Jan Aldrich, who's been on the show with you, and I had the good fortune to meet him when I met Gordon Lohr, who's also one of our dear friends and an author, and I will mention his book that you need to get and the link after the next break. But there are people that know, or Dr. Michael Swords, who has a different specialty. I mean, there are great resources and things, but to me, you knock everybody out of the water. I'm not just saying that.
Well, Well, it's I don't know. I don't know who would spend 55 years on a single topic, but I'm one of them. And over that amount of time, you tend to accumulate information and background and all that over time can largely become forgotten, but it still sticks with you. And I tend to live in the past rather than the present concerning this subject, because I feel that other people need to come along and take over and steer the subject in the right direction, hopefully. But I spend most of my time 50, 60, 70 years ago and more.
I mean, and do you feel like you have any more answers now about this?
Answers? Well, no. I don't think we know any more now than perhaps the people looking at airships knew in 1897. It's the subject is still referred to as unidentified. That means we don't have an answer. Flying objects, something's in the air that's unidentified, and they seem to be there, real, and not delusions. So whatever those are, we don't know. And some recent news stories have alluded to the military acknowledging that there are unidentified objects flying around, as I think many people know on this listening to this show.
Right. But I mean, this is not, if I'm correct, the first time that the military has mentioned over the decades that there's something flying around, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, initially when the modern UFO era broke out, there were some startling acknowledgments by some military people about then flying saucers seemingly being real and baffling everybody in sight about what these things were. But eventually a policy was formed, since the phenomenon didn't seem to exhibit a threat to national security. In other words, back then they weren't landing, they weren't sending armies of aliens out to take over cities. Nothing like that was evident. So I think the military felt that since it was their job to make sure national security was there and we weren't in trouble, they took a Wild West subject, as it turned out to be. I use that term because the reports came from everywhere, and people were reporting all sorts of peculiar shapes and sizes and all, primarily the saucers, but other shapes were involved too. It seemed to be a weird pastiche of sighting reports that I think everyone had a hard time dealing with. So the military took the attitude that, well, since this isn't a national security threat, that's obvious, we have to tone the rhetoric about this down, get the noise out, and try to concentrate on a signal. They would collect reports with the advent of what they called Project Sign, an official investigation. The possibility was still there that national security could have been a problem, but nevertheless, they collected reports and analyzed them to the best of their ability, and sometimes not to the best of their ability, and came to tentative conclusions about it. And publicly, the conclusion was there was not much to it, but privately, there was still a lot of concern behind the scenes. And that's the way it went for many, many years. And there were ups and downs in interest over those years. 1952 in particular was a very large up year for interest in flying saucers. And but it fluctuated until the end of the Air Force's term with the topic in 1969.
You know, and speaking of 1952, obviously 1952 was a big year. You are correct with the Washington, D.C. flap that occurred. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? Because I think a lot of people now, the younger people in the subject, don't even have a clue about what happened.
Yeah, 52 was fairly exceptional. Beginning in 47, you had about a 3-week period of activity that was rather intense, and it formulated the beginnings for the topic. People's impressions of what flying saucers looked like and how they behaved and all. They were rather different, somewhat different then than what people think now. In those days, these were distant objects flying very fast, sometimes leaving trails behind them, sometimes not, traveling in formations, but they were always seemingly very far away, and far enough away that you couldn't do much with the sighting reports. They were just distant objects that were kind of puzzling, but they weren't bothering anyone. And then as time went along, you get to 1950, and the sighting reports began to be closer. In fact, there were instances of objects landing, flying saucers coming on the ground, and very occasionally having so-called occupants being seen, someone who had operated these things. Whether they were true or not, those were the reports. But after 1950, I think the idea was in that these objects could possibly be from outer space, extraterrestrial. You saw science fiction adopting that theme and using flying discs as a model for spaceships that were being written up in the pulp literature at the time. So it was a slow progression of getting closer and closer to what these things were. In 1952, the year began fairly slow, but Life magazine decided to do an article based on what they had learned about the topic up to that time. And they shockingly, especially to the surprise of the government, were very favorable towards these things being from outer space. And they cited credible individuals, scientists, engineers, and all, who had both had sightings and also had very favorable opinions about whether the subject was real or not. The objects were, to them, possible spacecraft from other worlds, intelligent life contained within. So after that article appeared, Life magazine was a very, very popular publication. It was a weekly, and it specialized in pictures, large full-page photographs, and the pictures worth 1,000 words idea was never more evident than with Life magazine. They thrived on that, and they had a very large subscription base. People knew what life was everywhere. So when Life magazine said they thought these objects were from outer space, then the reports started to flow in more and more. And the Air Force, which had been recently taken over by Captain Edward Ruppelt, Project Blue Book was put together in late 51 to seriously deal with the topic. Prior to that time, the Air Force was rather dismissive, but with Ruppelt coming along, he had a more open attitude towards the subject, so he began to upgrade and improve the investigative network. The statements on the topic tended to be a little more positive and substantive about the sighting reports. In other words, people weren't deluded or practical jokers. They were serious about what they were seeing. So with that version of Project Blue Book in operation at the time, the upgrade of sighting reports was taken very seriously, and it increased through May and June. I recall Ruppelt saying at one point that they had decided to subscribe to a newspaper clipping service in April to monitor reports more carefully rather than just depend upon random submissions from whoever besides the military. And he said that at first the clippings came in envelopes, and the envelopes grew in size, and soon they were coming in bigger and bigger batches. They were mailing in shoe boxes, and finally large boxes, where in June and going into July, the press coverage was growing enormously. In July, around mid-July, I believe it was July 15th, something else was introduced into the argument. Well, they were collecting these reports. Independently, the Air Force decided to enact a program of 24-hour sky watches. They had created the Ground Observer Corps in 1949 under a different name called Operation Lookout, but it was an attempt by the government to make up for the lapses that we had with radar coverage. Radar was in its rather infancy at that time, and there wasn't complete usage of it. A lot of bugs had to be ironed out with it, but to make up for that lack of sophisticated technology, as we were to get later, they created the Ground Observer Corps, which was an attempt to get people, average citizens, to volunteer, to go out and watch the skies for the Air Force. They were done in 3-hour shifts. Each town, especially near the U.S. border areas, would have facilities set up where someone could go out and a pair of binoculars and various accoutrements of Ground Observer Corps watching, armbands and hats and little pins and all. They could participate and be sort of a kind of a semi-military, helping the government out by trying to spot aircraft. And in mid-July 52, they decided to go with 24-hour coverage. They had a problem, though. The volunteerism wasn't up to snuff for 24-hour coverage. That meant that they'd have to have people up, overnight, 12 to 3, 3 to 6 and all, watching the sky the whole time. That's not really all that attractive. But nevertheless, it was announced. So that was published in newspapers. They were trying to gin up interest in that. And I noticed that when I was doing a lot of press monitoring at various libraries and all, I was doing it quite a bit, about every weekend or so. I'd get out there and look at whatever newspapers I could find, trying to document coverage of the flying saucer history. So once that appeal for volunteers hit the press, there was a general upswing in coverage of flying saucers. 2 days later, there was a big story about a sighting by airline pilots Nash and Fortenberry, which I think is familiar to a lot of ufologists out there. And it appeared in practically every newspaper in the country that there was some kind of an aerial incident over Virginia. And unlike what had previously gone on with press coverage, originally when flying saucer stories would appear, very soon after the story, the Air Force would come out, make an announcement that, they've analyzed reports, they don't see where there's very much to it, or they'd be a specific debunking of a story, trying to dismiss it as nothing to worry about and all. And that went on from 47 up to 52. But there was something different as I looked at more and more press around this time, that there seemed to be less of that debunking. When stories would appear, unlike before, there would be no response from the Air Force. They would just let it go. And the stories each day grew in number and intensity. The the end of July of '52 was a wild time with the press. There were just literally thousands of newspapers covering it regularly, and just about every sighting that was reported crept into the press somehow, and would receive the same lack of mitigation by the government. They just wouldn't respond to these things, and it was a growing accumulation of this. And I was able to figure that there seemed to be a correlation between that press coverage and also the attempts by the Air Force to man up the Ground Observer Corps. Quite often when the UFO stories appeared, right beside those stories, I would see a lengthy appeal, either locally or nationally, by Ground Observer Corps officials to get people to come out. Even put two and two together, what's the best thing to do to get people to come out and skywatch for hours on end, but to give them the possibility that UFOs would appear, flying saucers. And oddly enough, the volunteerism rose through this time. And various regions of the country were saying, we're able to man our posts now and fulfill our obligation to the Air Force to get 24-hour coverage. Well, that caused even more interest. So the coverage was so intense by the press that it became alarming. It approached hysterical coverage. There were 2 weekends where there were sightings, radar incidents over Washington, which were getting screaming headlines. And with the advent of those reports, I think it kind of crossed the line for the Air Force's worry about national security, where it became somewhat concerning. If you have unknown objects flying over the Capitol and the White House and all, those are restricted air zones. You don't want that to happen. So right towards the end of the month, I think the Air Force decided enough was enough. They wanted to put a stop to the flying saucer coverage, so they had a press conference on July 29th.
And we're going to I want to talk about that, because of course we've got to go to a break. But this is really important, and you've laid out, this is, again, you're showing the history of how the powers that be manipulate and use the UFO topic to do their bidding. This is one example. We're going to get to more, and then you're going to finish your story. I'm Erica Lukes here with Barry Greenwood. I have been posting a great link. I posted a great link to his website, so you can read his article about Ground Observer Corps and Just Cause. So we will be right back. Stick around.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
With Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Toxins are everywhere, from the air we breathe to the food we eat and the water we drink. In a world where 80,000 known toxins and heavy metals threaten our very existence, how are you going to protect yourself and your loved ones? Introducing Pure Body Extra Strength, the world's first colloidal zeolite that helps trap and remove toxins as well as heavy metals from your body that are messing with your memory, clarity, sleep, and focus. Don't just take our word for it or the testimonials from our thousands of happy customers. Check out the hundreds of articles and case studies on the National Institute of Health website proving zeolite's powerful ability to remove toxins. For a limited time, listeners to KCOR will receive 10% off their first order. To get started, go to trypurebody.com and enter promo code RADIO10. Again, that's trypurebody.com. Toxic junk is all around us, but now you can take back control of your health and protect yourself by detoxing with Pure Body Extra Strength. You'll be on your way to sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and feeling more energetic. Go to trypurebody.com right now and get started today.
Now, broadcasting in digital HD radio.
Do you love new music? Yeah! Then tune in to the Americana Music Radio Show, Sundays at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, from the West Coast to the East Coast, and everywhere in between. Your host, Charles Christian, will introduce you to the artists both old and new, the Americana Music Radio Show, where we showcase new local talent, as well as international artists, as well as showing you where Americana music is happening and who's making it happen, both here in the U.S. and around the world. The Americana Music Radio Show, hosted by your musical aficionado, Charles Christian, every Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Are you ready to go? Turn your radio. It's showtime! You're listening to the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Break this up.
Broadcasting from the heart of Las Vegas, Nevada.
Their base is so large it has to draw most of its power from the nearby nuclear fusion plant.
The future of radio is here and now.
Radio signal.
Looking for cutting-edge conversations while exploring quantum possibilities? Then look no further.
We've got to fix
Broadcast Team Alpha, hosted by Nori Love and Augie Nost. They're connecting the dots and unraveling the cosmic mysteries with interviews from top experts, embedded insiders, and whistleblowers from around the world on an array of topics, from health, wellness, consciousness, and ufology, all in pursuit of
The truth.
Broadcast Team Alpha, hosted by Nori Love and Augie Nost. Live Tuesday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The balance of power is shifting in the world today, and the old paradigm is being replaced with a new one filled with love, positivity, and prosperity for all. The only question you have to ask yourself: are you ready for a change? Broadcast Team Alpha. Come explore the quantum possibilities.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Happy Fantopia Friday and welcome back to UFO Classified. I'm Erica Lukes. It is always great to get in to chat and to see my friends. I want to give a shout out to Phil, who has started the UFO Reporting Agency. They collect military, aviation, law enforcement, and public service UFO sightings, and you can go to them at ufora.report to learn more about the organization. I think Phil is an incredible investigator, and I wish him the best of luck. I know he's got great people working with him, so congratulations, Phil. I need to get you back on the show. I mean it. I really, really do. You know, I'm a slacker. I'm sorry. But I want to also just take a moment and thank all of the people that have generously donated to keep this show on the air. I have spent half a decade doing this show, and I have, for a majority of that, paid for it out of my own pocket because I just feel that I need to get information out there. For whatever reason, information, good information, factual information is completely losing its way. And now with some of the older researchers who are unfortunately leaving our planet, leaving this world, and the research is either being donated to organizations overseas or thrown in the trash or given to people who have no intention to scan and release it. We're really in a very critical time for the history of this subject, and I feel UFO Classified is one of those ways where I can bring on important people and let them tell you their stories and give you the history. Because when you go to YouTube now and when you look at some of these new people that are popping up, they most certainly don't have a clue about the historical aspects of the subject, how the United States government has manipulated the topic decade after decade for its own purposes, and we need to understand some of the great thinkers, the people that were brave, that risked their lives, that risked their careers, the alienated family and loved ones to pursue this topic. There's so many heroes, and so that is my goal with UFO Classified, is to remember these people and to get history, actual fact out to the public. It is critical, and I hope that you can just do me the favor, and when you see a show link posted, please share it on as many social media forums as you can. So, like I said, we can get good information out there. I also want to again say that the most important expose I have done in my show history, and I think one of the most important exposés in the history of the subject, not to toot my own horn, but I will because this is important and explosive, is the exposé on Skinwalker Ranch, on the time that Robert Bigelow had the ranch, and what I believe now to be a research project that really had very little to do with UAP research, to be honest. So if you get time, please listen to the interviews that I have done over the past few months with Chris Marks and Chris Bartell. Chris Bartell will definitely be coming back on the show. I have also been interviewing other people who are involved with bass, as well as people who live right next to the ranch. Very interesting to note that there were people that were actually told specific times where they were not to be allowed on the ranch during this time period. Isn't that interesting? Do you think that means the mothership's going to land, or do you think that means something else is going on? I don't know. Just throwing that out there. So anyway, I am back here with my friend, my mentor, somebody who is very, very dear to me, and someone who you need to learn as much about as you can. He has a wonderful, wonderful website where you can read Just Cause, which was his newsletter, Citizens Against UFO Secrecy. It is www.greenwoodufoarchive.com. You can read all of those. So do that. Learn the history. Share the information. Barry, I'm happy to always have you on here. I could sit and just listen to you talk for days and days, which I've done, and I love it.
Well, I'm not sure if you'd stay awake the whole time, but...
No, I have. I love it. No, I mean, it's so fascinating because, you've taught me so much over the years. And I think for me, I get kind of frustrated because other people are coming into this and they're buying the company line. And I get it because I did that. But the more I talk to you and the more I learn about all of this, the more I understand the breadth and the depth and the deception and all of these things that unfortunately go along with a subject that I wish we could just focus on the actual research, but unfortunately there is this aspect. But you were talking about before we left off, you were talking about a press conference, and if you could continue, that would be great.
Yeah. I mean, the Air Force had as a lot of UFO researchers know, a big press conference at the end of July '52 with the head of intelligence, General John Samford, dealing with the big UFO wave that had burst onto the scene beginning around mid-July, although there were definitely increase in sighting reports for months before that. It really blew up in July, and what the reasons were for that, I'm not sure, but they certainly were taking that blow up seriously. I did pull out a few stories from the time before I get to the press conference. Just after the reporting on the Ash Fortenberry incident that was in the press on the 17th, around the same time, Ed Ruppelt, who was in charge of Blue Book at the time, issued a statement saying that 60 saucer reports had been received in 2 weeks, which is a big upgrade over before, and that 1952 sightings were double the rate for 51. But that was it. He didn't issue anything like, the sightings are not of concern. He left all of that part out that had been in previous dismissals by the Air Force. And then a very significant statement, I thought, around the same time was from a Lieutenant Colonel Richard McGee, who was the director of civil defense for the Dayton, Ohio area. As you know, that was the home of Project Blue Book. He told the press openly that he was alarmed by the increase, and he added that there was something flying around in our skies, and I wish I knew what it is. And that was in a number of newspapers at the time. So if you thought there wasn't much to the reports, these two statements would argue otherwise. But anyway, the press conference was held, and it was to address the alarming increase in both sighting reports and the public reaction to it, which was by this time very large and very concerned, especially with the sightings over Washington. Well, part of the dismissal of the reports included the possibility that these were merely temperature inversions, a weather phenomenon that could cause radar to pick up seemingly solid objects. But there was nothing to them. They were just simply mirages, atmospheric effects. And it seems at that point much of the press bought that, considering the high rank of the official issuing the statement at this press conference. It was said at the time the press conference was the biggest one held in since World War II. That's how much attention flying saucers had generated at that time. But after the press conference, it was curious. It did contribute to reducing in the number of sightings that were being publicly reported. The press kind of lost its enthusiasm, figuring, well, they've got a handle on this now, so I guess we can report on other things. And it was really the first significant dismissal by the Air Force of the sighting reports since mid-July, when they had sort of allowed it to fester up to that point. But more importantly, at that time, during the press conference, the ranks of the Ground Observer Corps had been filled. They met their quotas. So they had the people they wanted in those roles to skywatch. So let's shoot the flying saucer thing down now. And through August, the reports had gradually decreased. It was still getting into the press, but not as much, and not as sensationally reported as before. But after the coverage dissipated towards the end of August, the volunteerism had faded away again. People, apparently believing the dismissals, decided, well, they said there wasn't anything to this, so, let's sort of go about our business and not do this anymore. It's boring anyway. You stare in the sky for a few hours and see nothing. That's not to say Ground Observer Corps volunteers hadn't seen flying saucers at the time. They did. And there are reports officially sent through channels from observers to the so-called filter centers that existed at the time. There were central locations where these volunteers could call in and tell them that they were seeing something in the sky, at which point the filter center officials would decide whether these sightings were something that were worth reporting to Air Force bases so that they could send aircraft up and see what's going on. They did that quite often. But that's the way it worked back then, and I don't think the Ground Observer Corps, after the end of August, was really the same as it was building up to that time. As the months and years went along, radar was becoming more reliable, and towards the end of the 50s, the Ground Observer Corps was disbanded. Now, there's a side issue on that. We still have not been able to find what happened to all the centralized records for the Ground Observer Corps. We don't know where they are. Obviously, they're filter centers, or there were filter centers around the country, plus records kept on a local level. The observers would have logbooks into which they would enter the activity, either not seeing much of anything, or if they had a sighting, they'd put it in the book, and that data would be passed along. If you ask the government today, they couldn't tell you where all the Ground Observer Corps records are. We have some. We have selected bits of information about it, some logbook entries we've been able to scarf together and all, but they never really accumulated all that into a place where even the history of the Ground Observer Corps could be consulted. They had a magazine at the time called the Aircraft Flash, and I found, I think, one article about flying saucers early on in that magazine's run. But after that, it was just the usual, we're starting a center here, we're closing a center there, the usual flux of what volunteerism would create. So I had called that activity during the period that the Air Force was withholding debunking these reports in July 52 as an example of passive manipulation. That meant that to achieve a goal with regard to UFO reports, the Air Force didn't have to do anything. They just held back. They didn't react and allowed a situation to develop where they would gain from it. In this case, they allowed flying saucer reports to proliferate to the point that it enticed people to volunteer for this service they had. And they achieved that goal. And when they didn't need it anymore, they started debunking again. And things went back to normal.
And so,
that's how that situation worked. It was very, very interesting. It's very stark when you look at a lot of press coverage at the time from all over the country.
And so when you look at what's taking place today with like To the Stars Academy and, all of, they're up and running and they want to get all of these reports funneled to them and, same types of things. They're putting things out in the media to kind of promote the topic. Could there be any parallels to what was happening then to now?
Oh, maybe in some respects, but in other respects, no, because number one, To the Stars is a private entity. It wasn't the government issuing pronouncements, so whatever they would say would be for private gain and to get donations from individuals. I guess in that sense, they were ginning up interest in UFO reports again and getting people to be involved with it. But in other respects, no. It's a curious thing. I was reading recently. A couple of times this year, there were some news stories about the Navy actually confirming the presence of unknown objects in the vicinity of training operations they had. Both times Politico somehow got sources to tell them that the Navy was officially looking into this, and they were officially concerned about it. One of them, I think it was around June, sometime mid-June, there was a report about senators getting classified briefings on UFO sightings, which would be, concerning the naval pilots that we've heard about discussing their sighting reports, including videos. So, and that report wasn't knocked down, it wasn't debunked, so there seemed to be some credibility to it. Senators were being briefed on UFO incidents. And earlier, I think it was in April, when the interest by Navy officials in sighting reports was confirmed, again through a news media source. Now, I took the information in both of those stories, which they were and are credible still, And I tried to find out what the Navy said about it. The Navy has a website. So I plug in the terms, unknown aircraft, UFOs, so on and so forth, and I get nothing. I can't find anything on the Navy's involvement with UFO investigations. The one thing I did find in the search I did, UFO did turn up, but it turned up in the context of a communications satellite called the UHF Follow-On, which they use the UFO acronym for that. But nothing related to unknown object sighting reports, Navy pilots, nothing. The Navy website was devoid of all of this. Yet the Navy Times, when the first announcement was made about official interest, confirmed the Politico story. They confirmed the Politico story, but not from the Navy directly. Now, the Navy Times, it seems to be a military-related publication, but it's actually independent. So they're more like the news media than they are a military publication.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to clarify.
Yeah. But I just found it odd that the Navy itself, given that, number one, they weren't interfering with reports that they were seriously involved in investigation. They had nothing else to say beyond what the news media was saying, yet not debunking it either. I guess in a sense that was somewhat like what the Ground Observer Corps situation was too. The Air Force wasn't getting in the way of the sighting reports, but in this case, I expected to find out even a little tidbit of information from the Navy about any of this, and they don't say a word about it. So that's really odd.
It is really odd. And of course, it's one of those things that most people in the UFO community won't even pick up on because they're so anxious just to believe that this is, the mother lode and this is where it begins and ends and disclosure is right around the corner and all of these things, which is...
Yeah, I think, officials are probably telling reporters that, there's serious interest behind the scenes, but officially... I think maybe they want to keep their lips zipped because of what happened with the Air Force years ago, where the topic would come up and almost every other time the Air Force commented on it, they stuck their foot in their mouths with some problem statement. I specifically recall in the mid-'60s, there were sightings out in Oklahoma where the Air Force issued a statement saying that certain stars were responsible, and those stars hadn't even risen above the horizon at the time of the sightings. That's very embarrassing. It shows a lack of attention being paid to the situation, and it was bad attention being given. They were inept. So the Air Force had done that so many times. Towards the time when Blue Book was closed, they regarded the topic as a monkey on their back, and they wanted it off, and that's what the Condon Committee was all about, to get that monkey off their back. It was right from the beginning intended to be dismissive of the whole thing, and that's exactly what they did, and it removed the Air Force from at least public investigations anyway. There's always a need for the military to monitor unknown aircraft or unknown objects in the skies, but they could do that quietly without public fanfare, as had happened in years before.
Right. Well, and there are. To me, what's taking place now, is incredibly unusual. And at first, when the December article came out in 2017 in the New York Times, I was like, this is great. It gives researchers a platform to talk about it, and people, tells the public that maybe there is something credible. But then I start analyzing some of the motivations behind the things, the whole thing, and the players involved, and also the fact that they're weaving this threat narrative into it, which I want to talk to you about before or when we get back. You had mentioned at the first of the show that the powers that be did not think this was a threat early on. And so why has the threat narrative been pushed into this? I mean, these are all really important questions, and I hope people start paying attention and start asking and demanding that these people who are pushing this new narrative, that they're forthright with information.
Yeah, this whole business with the Navy pilots and all is very curious, and I have a few questions about that when you come back.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about that. I'm always happy to have my friend Barry Greenwood here, and I want to just give a shout out to our friend, our very dear friend Gordon Lohr, who is a brilliant author. He is my co-author on a new book that will be out hopefully in a few months that we're working on. He has had the patience of Job. I just adore him. He wrote a great book called Flying Saucers from Beyond the Earth, a UFO researcher's odyssey. He was the man back in the day. He was with NICAP. He did a lot of important work, including helping preserve NICAP files, which could have eventually ended up destroyed, never seen the light of day. I love Gordon. You can go to his website, gordonlohr.com, to purchase his book. He would love it. I'm sure he would send you an autographed copy. He is a dear, and Barry and I just think the world of him. And actually, Barry introduced me to Gordon, and I'm eternally grateful for that friendship. So I'm Erica Lukes. You can go to ericalukes.com or UFOclassified.com. You can find me on Facebook. I try to tweet, but that's a little questionable. What can I say? Social media is not my bag. But we will be back after the break, and there are going to be more important topics that will come up. I hope all of these questions and thoughts that we're putting forward give you a pause for thought. This is a critical time. Make sure you understand the players that are involved, the games that have been played historically. We will be right back.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the second half of UFO Classified. Again, I am always happy to hang out with my friends on a Friday night and to get in to chat. See UFI, Phil, Northern UFOs, Ken, Jeff, David. I mean, everybody. I know that Irv is listening, and I want to tell one of the most talented artists in the world that I absolutely love, some of the drawings that he has sent me. In fact, last Christmas, it's almost that time of year, he sent me a couple beautiful pictures that he had done, and I adore them. I still have them. They're actually in my UFO archive, and so thank you to all of the people that love and support me. Although I've never met most of you in person, I feel that there's a genuine connection, and I know that all of us are on the same path. We're looking for information because most of us have come into contact with something that we can't explain. I know for me personally, that has driven me my whole life, and I feel that we deserve to understand the truth, and I feel like I've mentioned on many, many shows, I feel that there are certain powers that want to take away our personal power, that want to taint the sightings that we've had and the experiences and use it almost as a control mechanism. And so I think that that's pretty shameful, and I hope that at the end of the day, more people will start seeing that how easy it is to manipulate this subject and people's personal experiences. I am joined by a person who has been on my show a great deal because there's never a time when we can't learn from him. He is the world's foremost historian and archivist on the UFO subject. He has been in this game for decades, has seen a lot of different things, and for the most part really just keeps his head down and works quietly and efficiently. Barry Greenwood, you know you're my hero. I don't need to tell you. I mean, I'll keep telling you that because it's true. But I, first of all, thank you for your friendship and all of the support that you've given me.
Well, it's very much directed towards you, who's a devoted follower of the subject, and I'm glad someone can spread the word around about serious aspects of the phenomenon rather than a lot of the nonsense that is out there now. I think we need to have more of that related to the public so they know it's not a silly subject as much of the media paints it to be.
Well, and you know what I want to...
Recently, yeah, I know, I was just going to say, I'd recently spent more time doing historical work on scanning files and all. This summer I spent a while out in Chicago. This time with help. The previous 2 years I was out there alone doing it, and this time Jan Aldrich chimed in and he participated, and we were able to duplicate old files belonging to NICAP in the hands of the Center for UFO Studies now. And we had pretty much finished full years, 1963, 64, good chunk of 65, and 1968, 69, and 70. So what existed at NICAP and now at CUFOS is a copy available. You don't have to worry if the originals go into storage, and actually that's exactly what's happened. The files that I worked on with Jan are now in storage, and we're trying to find something to do with them to make them available again. It may be sooner or maybe later, but it's positive work for the whole field to have this material duplicated.
Well, it is, and I mean, I when I look at the process that you guys have to go through to do this, to restore the documents, to find them in the first place, and this is the amount of dedication and passion that all of you have is absolutely. I've never seen anything like it. And for each and every one of us, we should be incredibly appreciative of the fact that you are the reason, people like you and Jan are the reason that the history of this subject won't be forgotten. And now it's up to people like myself to make sure that is preserved and gets out to a younger generation, because we are, right on the, like I mentioned earlier, it's like we are right on the edge when the history will be rewritten, and we just can't have that happen.
Yeah. The subject I would still consider to be endangered. A lot of the mainstream press and media now have largely abandoned reporting on it, leaving it to the internet to deal with, which many websites are doing. But what we used to do with old newspapers and magazines in the past, it's done quite differently now. And, we're trying to preserve what happened in the old days so the newer generations can understand what happened back then and have it reported in a way that's not mangled and embellished with untrue things. And that's happened a lot in this subject.
It absolutely has.
We just want to get back to the core of the topic. We just want to strip down of all the nonsense and get back to what really happened.
Well, and we shouldn't. It's funny to me because I watch some of these new people appear on social media, and it's like I think that they honestly have been manipulated by certain people in the intelligence community, and it's like they're steering this narrative and promoting things. And now that we've got the internet, it is just really disturbing to see the way social media can manipulate people and promote things. And it's like, oh my gosh, Barry. I mean, it's just sometimes, and you're not on social media, but I will just say it's been very disturbing for me to sit back and watch some of this. And the fact that people aren't willing to ask questions, which we should be able to question things, and we should be able to get answers if this is legitimate.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that there's a new push now to present the subject as a threat.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, how? Because you mentioned that, for the past, how many decades? 7 decades? We have not seen that presented as a threat. So why now are we seeing it presented as a threat by Luis Elizondo, by the Bigelow boys, and certain things? Why would that be happening?
Well, yeah, I watching this from afar, I'm not connected to the folks that are doing To the Stars. One of the consumers out there who receives the information. We received information, received some that was seemingly pretty credible, like the videos and statements from pilots, which are now out there and well worth consideration. Certainly the Navy has taken that seriously on an official level with what we discussed earlier and all. But, I did note that it's being presented in the context of a threat. And I'm curious about what may be behind that characterization, because I think what's been shown so far isn't radically different from the past, where the Air Force had dealt with sighting reports and all. For example, you have the videos coming out showing aircraft pursuing or monitoring odd aerial vehicles moving along, sometimes in lengthy videos, and displaying seemingly peculiar characteristics, and these were FLIR videos, if I'm correct. And I was thinking to myself, I remember the old days when the Air Force would send up aircraft and use the old gun camera film to get images of these. And not all of the images are very good. I only know of one gun camera film that's good at all as far as presenting an image from way back. But the videos being presented now, I thought, well, these are FLIR type videos. Where's the visible light video on each one of those? I'm sure the pilots didn't just expose FLIR imagery and get nothing in the visible light range like you would have gotten from a regular camera. What happened to the films of these objects, showing them the way they appeared to the naked eye? I'm puzzled why those aren't around. They should be. I would certainly want that in conjunction with FLIR videos. But these images that are being shown by To the Stars are, they're definitely not normal light images. They're different. And I would like to see what happened with the regular photography on these, which must have been taken.
And you know, I remember, you know, when the news first broke in December. I mean, you and I were, I mean, obviously we talk a lot and things, and I had a much more optimistic outlook about this. I mean, because I'm a lot younger. I mean, not a lot younger. I didn't mean to say it that way, but like I'm younger in the field, and I haven't seen what you've seen, and it's you know, I mean, I just remember you kind of cautioning me and saying, okay, but you need to look at this, and then we need to wait for that, and different things, and I'm like, oh no, I want this to be something incredible, and well, you know, 2 years later, it's not what they presented it to be. So, I mean, what are you making of this? And when they're
the images are what they are. I mean, that's what was released, and they seem to have been asserted as genuine images. Although I think they're probably not in context. I don't think these are the original images. I think they're copies that have probably been edited. But besides that, there has to be other exposed images that show them in a I think a clearer light. I'll give you an example. In 1953, there was a sighting over Arizona near Luke Air Force Base where a pilot was sent up, and he had a gun camera, and he was supposed to see what this was, whatever. It was a strange object that was reported, and I'm not sure how it originally was sighted, but he was sent up in enough time that he was able to not only see it, but close in on it. He was able to outrun whatever it was. The only reason that he didn't get super close was because it was at such extreme altitude that he couldn't climb that high. But nevertheless, he got some nice, clear film of this whatever it was, and it showed a vapor trail, a contrail, with a very, very sharp leading edge, almost like a knitting needle type edge. And as you follow the trail back from the object, you really couldn't see a distinct object. All you could see was this white, very sharp rocket shape, and then it sort of blended into the vapor trail with no real separation between an object and the vapor trail. And then the vapor trail oddly split in two and reformed again, be further down behind the trail of the object. So the pilot's closing in, and as he's doing that, you can see the image getting larger and larger. And he had to cut it off a few tens of thousands of feet away from the object. He never really was able to get a good ID on it, and it went into the Blue Book files as unknown. But it was a clear image. It was very sharp, unlike some of the Navy images where they appear to be fuzzy with the sort of a halo around them and all. That's the kind of image I would like to see with the Navy videos, a real image rather than a heat image. So the Air Force was able to do that back in 1953. We should have better images of these things now than that. That's a long, long time ago, and the photography was good. But even beyond that, a threat. This is described as a threat. Well, the threat, maybe to a point. Maybe you can't identify these things, and aircraft are chasing them, and they don't know what they are. But beyond that, they haven't demonstrated anything in the way of damage or interaction physically with anything beyond being photographed. The photographs are kind of subject to interpretation, I think. I just don't see the threat. Years ago, the Air Force would send up interceptors, chase these whatevers. They never caught any of them. and if there are any other good images besides the one that's available from Luke Air Force Base, that they haven't made those public either. There's a lot of talk about sighting reports having been destroyed, and maybe that was done, maybe it wasn't. Maybe the reports were buried the same way they were talking about recent phone conversations being buried in a highly classified server where nobody can access them. That information could still be out there, but we just don't know where to look. At one time, Norton Air Force Base stored UFO films. They were known to have stored them because a friend of mine had called and gotten the base official in charge of the photography section, and they acknowledged that they did have UFO films. They were asked, what films? Can you say which ones? They mentioned Tremont, Utah, and Great Falls, Montana. These are films we knew about already. They were public. They were in Blue Book. When Blue Book was declassified and released, the films were made available. They're at the National Archives now, so those aren't a mystery. But the official added that, well, there are other things, but they're password protected, meaning that only a high-ranking officer could access them with a proper password. Otherwise, they couldn't release anything about them. So, yeah, films were being withheld. And they may have been good, interesting, high-quality films of strange objects, but they weren't about to release them to anyone. So the current Navy business, it's interesting, but we were only getting a tiny piece of the story on that. And whether there's any more is hard to say.
Well,
I'm almost certainly information is being withheld.
Right, and I think it is interesting that this this isn't necessarily the Navy. This is a group of people who have To the Stars Academy, people that were formerly involved with Bigelow. I mean, there's a very clear and apparent attempt to make money from this. and so it's you wonder it's like, wow, what's going on here?
Yeah, well, I'm referring specifically to the Navy direct releases of these things and all, which they've acknowledged now. But, they must have more. Maybe the To the Stars people know they have more. Maybe they do have this information, but they themselves aren't making it available. I recall when the original announcement was made about these films that they had as many as 24 images. Different images besides the ones that have been released. Where are those? Nothing's been said.
Right. And the whole thing is very, very interesting to me. And I'm sure for people who are willing to get their hands dirty and get in there and really go back and look at things, and look at specific people who are investigative journalists who are promoting this and promoting contractors and promoting, specific narratives and things. And you start looking at the patterns that are taking place. It's like, whoa, this has been an ongoing thing for the past 2 decades, and the same group of people, and what really has come out of this at the end of the day. We look at the $22 million that was allocated for funding. Was that really allocated for UAP research? My guess would be, by looking at some of the documents that I've come in contact with and seen, thanks to Keith Basterfield, that that wasn't the case. And so has this whole thing been manipulated in the UFO narrative, been used as a ploy? The whole thing is really it's unfathomable to me, but I think it's happening. So,
well, yeah, the threat may be perceived as unknown objects intruding on training activity by naval fleets and all. In that sense, it could be seen as a threat, but that's happened all through the years at different times. There was a Navy fleet in 1952, Operation Mainbrace, that had reported UFOs as well, and one of those was photographed. But it's nothing happened to any aircraft or ships. There was no threat beyond just seeing something odd in the sky. So that's happening now the same way. It's not much different.
Right, and this is so great to hear, because the threat narrative is something that has really bothered me. And I mean, and I know that we've got 3 minutes to break, but I'll just ask you this before we go, and then we can talk about it a little bit when we get back. But I mean, can you think of any cases, out of all the cases that you've looked at historically, where people have actually been injured or killed by UFOs?
Well, injury, certainly, yeah. There's any number of incidents like that. There are catalogs of CE2 cases where whatever they were, objects or sightings, exhibited some physical effect on the environment, like some people have been burned. There was a case in 1965 where police, observing a football field-sized object in the sky, had become sunburned from whatever light was emitting from this. It was sort of repeated, and I think it was probably the case used to illustrate what was in Close Encounters, where Roy Neary was burned looking out his truck at one of these objects. His wife noted he had a sunburn. Well, that happened to a cop in Texas in 1965. There's many examples of that. Yeah, another incident in Canada, Stephen Michalak, Manitoba, received a burn pattern on his chest from an object that had been on the ground and shot some kind of heat or flame at him, and it burned a checkerboard pattern into his chest and clothing. And there's a very large case file on that out in the NICAP files.
Oh, and I need to talk to you about that.
There's a very large record of that.
Okay, that is amazing. I'm Erica Lukes here with Barry Greenwood. We're going to get ready for our last break. Stick around. We will be right back.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
With Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Immerse yourself in an epic journey through time where ancient mysteries unfold within a story of love and betrayal, as well as a battle of good versus evil in The Emissary Book 1. The reader's favorite Gold Medal Award winner for Visionary Fiction 2019, The Action and Adventure of The Emissary, continues in The Emerald Tablet, Book 2. The 2019's Bronze Medal Award winner, The Emissary and The Emerald Tablet by Tamara Veach and Rennie DeFazio are both available now on Amazon.com. Let your reading adventure begin.
Vegas, baby! Vegas' #1 source for talk and new music.
How cool is that?
1 million miles till midnight. A story of timelines, artificial worlds, simulated races, and the galactic imprint, and the destiny of a blue world called Earth. 1 million miles till midnight, written by Solaris Blue Raven, is a journey through the mind's eye which allows the reader to surf a wave of technological and multidimensional intellect, revealing a bridge between conscious design and the truth. A multidimensional bleed-through awakens the world of artificial intelligence to set sail into the frontiers of a vast multiverse, morphing planets and terraforming ascended worlds beyond the linear programs of a fated race. 1 million miles till midnight will awaken, inspire, prepare, and enlighten one to the many multidimensional states of consciousness and worlds we reside in. With every cell and atom, we are this truth and multiverse. 1 million miles till midnight. Written by Solaris Blue Raven. Available now at Amazon.com. Don't wait. Get your copy today.
There is a world outside that which we live in, a realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix. The Paradigm Matrix. Hosted by Willie Miranda. Every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room.
The 1 hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole. The Paradigm Matrix explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
1, 2, 3, 4!
To the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
I love the way it sounds.
Love the music. I listen all day.
The future of radio is here and now.
You're listening to UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes. Erica Lukes.
It is always with great sadness that I come to this point in my show where I know that this is my last segment. I could talk for hours. I love doing this. This is fun to be here with all of you, and I love all of the messages that I get, and I'm sorry I can't respond to all of them, but I appreciate you taking the time to reach out to me. I am incredibly grateful to be here on KCOR with Tina Marie, who is an excellent producer and station manager. I love being here, and it means the world to me that I have the support of my audience. I also have the support of people like Barry Greenwood and Gordon Lohr and Fran Ridge, Rich Vitello. Rich Vitello is actually going to be here next week. Rich Vitello donated his entire UFO archive, his library, to me, which was incredible. He's been in the subject for decades as well and wanted to make sure that it went to a good place. So I'm grateful for that, and I look forward to talking to him next week. He has done an incredible amounts of work over the years. It'll be really, really cool. Right now I'm here with Barry Greenwood, and we're talking a little bit about some of the instances where people have been hurt. Is it a true threat? What at the end of the day are the motivations of whatever this is that we're dealing with? But, Barry, please continue about some of these cases that you were talking about.
Well, I mentioned the Michalak report before from Manitoba. I think if you're talking about threats, if there was a threat from the phenomenon, I would have thought that Michalak would have been blasted into atoms instead of just knocked over and left alive. There is anything nefarious about whatever these objects were. That wasn't done, and I mean it's a threat as far as, say, someone coming up to you on the street and kind of slapping you in the face and all. I mean, a real threat would have done more damage. But in this case, it was just a very peculiar story with physical evidence left behind. Was it a hoax? A lot of people would suggest that. Well, I don't think it's been proven one way or another what happened with that, but he always had stuck to the story, and his family supported it after the fact. I don't think he's around anymore. But there's plenty of information to consult on it. Beyond that is physical damage to people. I'm trying to think of other things. Valentich, the pilot,
right
over Bass Strait, Australia. He's flying to a location, reports a UFO, is turned upside down and crashes, or something happened to him. He disappears, and after searches, no wreckage, no body turns up, and it's over 40 years ago. And he's gone. He's still gone. I don't think anything conclusive came of it, but you can probably conclude that the man was killed.
Right, but I mean,
where is he?
But I mean, you look at all of this and the fact that people are trying to label us a threat because, of course, when you label it as a threat and you're a contractor, you can get funding from the government. Totally obvious there on that one.
Yeah.
But, I mean, when you look back at the hundreds of thousands of reports of interacting with all of this over centuries, there aren't a lot of stories where people have been killed by this. Colaris might be one example, though, where there were people that were physically injured. And do you know much? I'm sure you know a lot about that case. I know Jacques Vallée was interested in investigating that.
But yeah, I hadn't been involved in that directly and all, and it's a Brazilian case too. So I think the primary paperwork on it is in Portuguese. But yeah, it's been extensively written in the UFO press. It's a curiosity, but I don't know what to say about it beyond that. Compelling, interesting, but I don't know if it's a strange phenomenon doing that. I'm not sure. I have no certainty about it.
And so over the years and over the decades since you have been really looking at this, I mean, and you've seen the interference from the United States government, and you've seen the different ways in which they might help this, or they might insert little bits of disinformation and things along the way. I mean, what would be your best advice to a younger generation coming into this?
Well, if you look at the U.S. government involvement in this, I think a lot of what they've done with the UFO phenomenon is definitely explain some reports. Without a doubt, I think a majority of raw reported UFO sightings can be explained as something more mundane, and they did that occasionally, sometimes very well, but they also showed evidence of having covered up their own ignorance on the phenomenon. Besides, there's examples where they clumsily explain away reports with silly explanations that couldn't possibly be true. Were they hiding something in those cases, or was it just clumsiness? You decide. A lot of those people are gone now. They're not available to interview anymore, but yet that flow of events is on the record. With regard to physical evidence on UFOs, crash saucers, artifacts, things like that, I think the longer you're in the subject, a lot of us had thought that it seemed less and less likely that they had crash saucers and bodies, despite what a lot of rumoring going around has offered. I never was a big fan on advocating spacecraft inside Air Force hangars, like Hangar 18 or stories like that. I just
so you're basically you mean
I spent years looking at government documents and
right.
looking for hints at how they dealt with the phenomenon and all, but with regard to artifacts and whole objects held behind the scenes, I just didn't see good documentation on that. A lot of stories, but the paperwork just didn't point anywhere. And it also didn't suggest that the way history would have flowed had they had a spaceship as opposed to not having one. It should have been different now if they did have some sort of a extraterrestrial vehicle in the past. I would have expected invention and technology to perhaps be more accelerated than it would have been otherwise had that happened.
I mean, and so to me, looking at this now, it looks like this is just a big propaganda tool. And it's, of course, if you've got, these crashed saucers or, A, B, C, and D in your possession, then you have the superior military advantage. And so, of course, what government wouldn't want to put that out, because that makes them look like the big dog on the block.
Well, I think considering current events and all, would you say the United States is now in a superior position worldwide to exert its influence? It looks like it's going in the opposite direction.
Right.
Not technologically, but it with respect to influence and power, it just seems to have abated somewhat on the U.S. side due to politics and in dealings with the rest of the world. Things have changed now from what they used to be. I think people have become pessimistic about the U.S.'s dominance in the world. If we had crash disks, I think we'd be pretty dominant.
Right. Absolutely.
Doesn't seem to be the case.
Right. And so what do you think the motivation is behind all of this, the narrative that we're hearing about the crash disk, the metamaterials, yada, yada, yada? I mean, what's the
Well, we haven't
goal
yet
there?
to hear much about the metamaterials beyond a few releases. I'm hoping that in the second manifestation of the TV series that To the Stars has been involved with, that these metamaterials are going to be the prominent issue there, and we'll have a full detailed discussion of it all. I'd be very disappointed if we didn't. I mean, there are photographs floating around on the internet now of these objects, and I'm not too comfortable with these objects either, these artifacts. From what I understand, they originated from an anonymous person associated with Art Bell's radio show.
Right, are you talking about Art's part?
Yeah, well, yeah, in part.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about the origin of that. It's not a something that makes me comfortable.
Well, and it is very curious on that. And I have to ask you, and I'm sorry to cut you off there, but I wanted to kind of get into a little bit some of the other, different countries that are taking a much more progressive and productive approach on actually doing research with regard to the phenomenon. And you look at France and even Chile, you look at Norway, and there seems to not be this sort of this garbage inserted into the narrative. Why do you think that is?
They tend not to clutter up. They don't. I don't think they like to clutter up their end of the subject with a lot of the rumor mongering that comes from the United States. Without a doubt, the rumor mongering is wild and crazy, emanating from the U.S. It always has been, and I think other countries try to sift that out and try not to incorporate all of that into what they may be finding on their end. For example, you mentioned Hestelin. They have their own isolated series of UFO experiences and events that they don't dress up with outside influence, like incorporating some of the conspiracy theorizing that goes on in the U.S. They try to keep that out of the narrative and proceed cleanly with their own assessments and interpretations locally of what's going on there. Italy has a long history of creating wonderful filtered collections of information, catalogs of sightings and information that are quite helpful to researchers that try not to include a lot of nonsensical things embedded within the reports. They do have that to an extent, yes, but I don't think it's just as wild as it's happened in the United States. The United States is the birthplace of rumor mongering now, and the proliferation of it. I think it can be characterized that way, and it's got to be stopped and get back to some normalcy.
Well, it absolutely, and I think the thing that is it's disheartening for people who actually have had real experiences here in the U.S. because there is something credible and there is something beautiful and important, and we deserve to actually look at that. And I commend people like Erling Strand and Dr. Massimo Teodoranti and people like that who are making considerable contributions to the field, and they're not doing it under the tainted lens of what's taking place in the United States.
Right. It is disheartening to see a lot of the extraneous, crazy theorizing going on, and it's just tending to discourage serious researchers from wanting to go public. I don't want to be connected with it. I don't want to be involved with it. I stay underground. I just keep my head down, and I don't want to pop my head into that atmosphere. Even though it does pop up now and then to me, I think I've discussed with you a few times something called Harbor Freight.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. This is a good one.
For the last 2 years, I've been receiving a catalog. Now, this is it's a legitimate company out there, Harbor Freight. I think a lot of people recognize it. They see it in advertising sent in their mailboxes and large catalogs. It's basically a hardware store. They sell the overhead lighting and saws and workbenches and so on. It's just typical hardware. I didn't have much connection to it. I wasn't involved with it, and it's only about 2 years ago I started getting the catalogs in the mail. It wasn't because I was looking for them. I didn't expect them, but one thing that was really odd about them was that I received one with my proper name and address on it, but then I started receiving copies of the same catalog, and they'd be addressed. One was to Bud Hopkins. Another one was to Stanton Friedman. Another one was to Bowen Peep, people who were later involved with the Heaven's Gate suicides in 1997. Another one, Frank Edwards. These are all common UFO names, but they were being sent as addressed to my personal address. Now that suggests someone is out there who knows me and works for Harbor Freight, putting my name and mixing it up with these other folks. I can't imagine who it is. I'm not inferring anything threatening or evil about it, but nevertheless, I don't know where these came from, and it's sort of kind of a semi-violation of privacy when someone does that.
Well, and I think it's really interesting too, because you've showed me the cover, or with the Stanton Friedman, and it's like it's not just Stanton Friedman. It is underneath it. There's a code MJ12. I mean, and then so on, and so what?
Yeah, that was the MJ12 was added in as if it were an apartment number at my street address. I have no apartment here, so. The mail person just delivers it. They don't care. It's a street address. But someone was trying to dress it up with all sorts of UFO things. And the latest ones I got were a little bit different. The one I got 4 of them today. 3 of them were addressed to these other people, and one was to me. The one to me had a kind of an embossed message about a liquidation sale. It's sent to Hello Barry. But the other ones were addressed to Dear So-and-so with the same message. I don't know why. It's an odd difference. But it's been going on for quite a while now.
Well, and I think that when you showed me some of the covers, with the Stan Friedman and Bo and Peep and different things, it was very interesting to see that the photos or the advertisements on that specific page, because this was for safety goggles, this was for rope, for gloves, for hooks. I mean, for things that you could, in my mind, when I looked at that, I thought, wow, that's certainly something. I wouldn't want to receive that. And so it is so odd that it's not commonplace at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, to a man, it's not unusual. It's hardware.
Right.
I would get hardware catalogs, but I fail to get the point of the joke. I mean, it's sending it out, and whatever reaction I have, I can't react to anyone because I don't know who's doing it. I could send it to Harbor Freight, and they would just blow it off as saying, well, just throw them out if they're misaddressed. It's someone specific who knows me and is somehow got a link into the making of the address stencils for this company. I can't imagine who would do it, but I'm making an issue out of it now on the air here. It's just odd.
It is odd. No,
do that,
right. And I think some people listening don't know why MJ12 or Stan Friedman would be something that would come to you. And then the reason for that is because you did extensive years worth of work on MJ12, debunking the documents and going up against Stan Friedman. And so, that was one of your big things that you accomplished in your career.
Well, I mean, the most obscure one here is Bo and Peep. I mean, how many people would know what that meant if they weren't in the subject? And a lot of people in the subject wouldn't know what it meant.
And so what could there be?
Something. It was common in the late 70s, but now it's not so well known unless you're very familiar with the Heaven's Gate suicides and realize that Bo is the guy that led the group that committed the suicides. Just odd,
And so
I don't know what to make of it.
I mean, why would whoever bring those two people up with regard to you?
Well, I had nothing to do with Bo and Peep, so that's just something tossed. I mean, I knew Bud Hopkins, I knew Stan. I didn't know Frank Edwards. He died 1967. So there's no connection to me at all, except I read his books. And of course, Bo and Peep I had nothing to do with either. But I don't know. Is it intimidation? I don't know. I'm not intimidated by it. It doesn't bother me a bit. It's just silly that someone would go to the trouble of doing that. Either it's someone that works there that's typing these stencils out, or it's someone that I know that's continuously sending coupons with these names and addresses on there, my address, and hoping it has some effect on me, which it doesn't. To me, it's just amusing.
Yeah,
it might mean something to someone else. It just doesn't intimidate me.
Well, I mean, and it's interesting, though, because I think people, you hear every once in a while about researchers that do come into contact with this type of thing, over the years, and some people react to it better than others, like you, or just, okay, whatever, where I had...
Well, yeah.
I had
At the very least, it's an invasion of privacy.
Right. And
they have no business putting those names with my address.
Right. Absolutely. It's really strange. Yeah. And for me, you've been my friend for a long time, and you were friends with me when that person walked into my business, wanted to see my modem and different things like that. So it's like this forms happen. But to what extent?
In different forms. I mean, I think everybody has a little story like that to tell of odd events that don't seem to fit into anything normal in your life, but somehow is connected to the topic and all. It's not to say there's there's not some oddball people out there just doing this out of a lark, just having fun. But seems like a lot of effort for nothing.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Who knows at the end of the day what it is, who's behind it? But you've definitely given our audience a lot of things to think about and important questions, especially for people who are just getting into this and who are sucked up by YouTube or Facebook groups, and you want to believe that bright shining star and the narrative that's been given to us, or we've been manipulated. I think it's really good for you to explain the history of this and how the government has manipulated belief systems, because there's something genuine here, and we need to find out what that is and separate that from the noise. And you've done a beautiful job explaining that and laying that out for us. So Barry, thank you so much for being here. You are always incredible to have on the show. You can go to greenwoodufoarchive.com to check out all of Barry's work. Just Cause is an amazing publication. I am Erica Lukes. I will be here next week with Rich Vitello. Have a wonderful night and stick around for Willie Miranda. We'll catch you next week.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcast